Good morning, everybody. Money management, bankroll management, expected value, making a positive return on your investment. And today, Andy Iskoe and I are going to talk about prop betting. Now, we've been talking about this for a while, but with the NBA finals starting this evening, there are so many prop bets out there. It's unbelievable. It really is. It's like a Super Bowl because
Oh,
we
by the way, I
know.
can give a very brief description of how prop betting started. That was back in 1985 for the Super Bowl when the heavily favored Bears were like 10-point favorites over the New England Patriots. And it didn't figure to generate a lot of action because it was expected to be a one-sided game. And I forget who it was. If it was Jimmy Vaccaro or maybe it was Sonny Reisner who came up with, let's put a prop in there. Will Refrigerator Perry score a touchdown for the Chicago Bears? And it was sort of like a little gimmick, and it opened like, I don't know, 20-1 and closed it like 4-1. Everyone was playing it. And basically at that point, it got a lot of nationwide publicity. I remember I was living in I think I was living in Little Rock at the time, and we were getting a lot of talk about that on ESPN was talking about it, and it became sort of like a little cottage industry, the development of props, and it really grew into the 1990s. And for the most part, I think we talked about it in the ATS podcast yesterday. I mentioned it that throughout the 2000s, it was basically limited to the Super Bowl, and then more and more properties started to put up props for AFC, NFC championship games, and moved into Monday night football and Thursday night football. And in some places, there are even some limited props, player props and team props, but especially player props on every Sunday NFL game. It's just become a very popular way. And, with technology, you couldn't do this 30 years ago when you were writing tickets by hand and you had to change the numbers on the board because they weren't electronic. But technology now is such that you can just add a little line of code in there, and boom, you've got a new prop up there, and you can adjust the price on it instantly. And so what's happened is that, for example, the Westgate, which used to be the Las Vegas Hilton, and then the LVH, with Jay Kornegay for many, many years, he recently retired. I think it was late last football season. In any event, he developed a team there, and they have something like 400 to 500 individual props on the Super Bowl. Now, the beauty of the Super Bowl and why I started getting involved in it is that you've got, depending upon the season, 1 or 2 weeks to evaluate the props and find some of the weaknesses there. And there are a lot of people, professionals who we both know, who spend a lot of time gearing up during the postseason with so few games being played, getting ready for when the props come out, knowing what sort of teams are likely to get there, what the numbers are, etc. And so they're well prepared when they come out. Now, of course, with FanDuel and DraftKings, and let's set it over to the NBA, for example, as we're talking about, they are now, they have a very short shelf life. In other words, they come out in the morning for tonight's game, and so you have 8 hours to bet them, and then the next day's schedule comes out and they start putting the props out. So it's been a little bit more of a challenge lately because you don't have as much time to study the props as you did, for like a single event like the Super Bowl, which creates a lot of advantages for the players who concentrate only on certain types of props. Let's say they concentrate on rebounds. Let's say rebounds, points, and assists, as opposed to the books who have to turn around one night, within 24 hours and put lines up on all these props. So there are some advantages that can be gained by specializing even in the area of props.
Excellent. By the way, this is Proline TV on YouTube, and please send in your comments. You can yell at us if you want to. That's fine. We will try to reply to everything. We like to get criticisms if you think, or it makes suggestions as to what maybe we should be talking about. We're kind of an open forum here. We're trying to teach you how to not go broke and how to make money. It's a kind of a double-edged sword there, but don't go broke. It's okay to break even, and it's okay to make money.
I think the phrase is bankroll preservation and growth.
Bankroll preservation and what?
Growth, Growth.
Okay, I like that one. Okay, we can do that. It is fun. It's an exercise that we haven't done before, and we're learning as we go. there's different ways. We're talking about there's a pot of money. Okay, so how are we going to use that money? Not too fast. So if we have a bad week, we're out of business in September and we can't make it to the Super Bowl to even have money left. We don't want to be that way. So when we're talking about prop betting, originally we talked about 2% of your bankroll on a side or a total, but now we're digging into your pot of money, your bankroll, and talking about betting on props. Well, you know how much you got in the bankroll. So this is difficult to manage because now we're adding the number of types of bets that you can make. So it is harder to figure out, and I will admit that, and I don't have that answer.
Well, one of the things is let's take a look at let's take a look at say that you have a certain bankroll, whatever it is, and you normally use like 2% for a play. But sometimes it's also good to say I'm going to limit my per play to 2%, but I'm going to limit the total bankroll in action to maybe 10%, 15% on a day, something like that, maybe a little bit higher, depending upon how aggressive you are. And that just means that you spread out your 2% wagers over either a smaller number of bets or a larger number of bets. And, in these props, you could literally have in tonight's opening game for the NBA Finals, you could literally have 36 individual props decided and played in the first half.
I've read, just going through my notes and what other people are talking about. I don't originate props that often, so I'm learning as I go. This was not part of my generation that I learned how to bet.
Our generation.
Yeah, so this is a new thing. And basically, the props have grown a lot since the states started to legalize. The DraftKings and FanDuels and BetMGM and all these companies are creating these new things to bet on. And
there's an appetite out there, a huge appetite.
Oh, huge, especially for the younger folks. The younger generation love this part of the betting system more than they do the sides and the totals, which basically you and I went back to that.
Yeah.
So, but this is all a learning experience. Now, the odds and the prices that you're laying on some of these props are pretty bad, but I'm gonna read you one. Obi Toppin, who plays for Indiana, is a pretty good three-point shooter. I mean, he's not Steph Curry, but nobody is. But when you look at, this is the analysis. Now, I don't originate this, so I'm reading this. Based on the OKC defense, they allow a lot of corner threes. Now, corner threes is the shortest three-point shot. It's a three-point shot, but the way the structure of and somehow this is a very popular shot if you can get open. Well, OKC allows that shot to be open more maybe than they should, but we can't complain about OKC because right now they're definitely the best team in basketball at the moment. So that's over 2. It says, okay, 2+ 3-pointers by Obi Toppin. So basically it's 3 3-pointers, you get plus 220.
Yeah, two. I think it's 2 or more.
Yeah. If you get 220 on this bet, and if that's a proper analysis, that's a pretty damn good bet. I think, matter of fact, since I've read this, I'm going to go make that bet. I'm going to put $500 down on it. Why not? Somebody's done some work on this, and they know more about it than I do. I know who I like in the game. I know who I like in the side. And I'll look at the over and under for each team sometimes, like you do in baseball. You get a pitcher, you figure the one team's going to score all the runs, so you have an edge. And then you look at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the number of steals. Well, we know this is going to be a high tempo game. The biggest danger for Indiana is that OKC has a lot of blowout wins. They beat a lot of teams by 20, 30, 40, 50 points. I mean, they can get on a roll and you just can't keep up with them. Well, if this is a high tempo game, you're going to have more opportunities to get points and steals. So I don't know what happened there. I lost my screen. Okay.
He averages 1.7 steals per game. And again, you mentioned the blowout because that's important as far as how many minutes he plays. Clearly, if you're winning games by 30 points and you want to rest your starters, you're going to play fewer minutes than if you're in a lot more competitive games. He averages still 30, what's it, 30, I think it's like 34 points per minute per game as far as 34.2 minutes per game. So he basically sits out the equivalent of 3 minutes a quarter.
This is the kind of thing where the younger folks with the databases that we have today, that's another issue. Back in the day, we didn't have these kind of databases.
Unless you kept it yourself.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of work.
And a lot of work. And so this is what we're talking about. So that's a bet that I personally, I like what their analysis on it. And saying Gilgis is going to get over 1.5 steals. I like that too, because this is going to be a high tempo game, a lot of pace.
What I would like to see, and I haven't looked for it yet, do they show the number of team turnovers created by or committed by Indiana? Because Oklahoma City is really good at forcing turnovers, and that might be a number that I would look at as far as going over. I don't know what the number would be.
But on the other side, of course, now we have to adjust everything by who they played. Indiana doesn't turn the ball over that much.
Yeah.
But they haven't played this kind of a defense either.
Well, they played. I don't have the box score in front of me, but I know they gave up. I think they had a couple of double-digit losses in the 2 games that they played against OKC. One was late in the season; it was a 20-point loss at the end of March, and one was a lot earlier in the season. I think it was a 11 or 12-point loss or something. And yeah, Oklahoma City is a very good defensive team, but that might be something that I would take a look. I'm going to mention 2 things about my approach to props in general. Number one, I will often look for props or consider props that have nothing to do with who I think is going to win the game. In other words, I may have an opinion on the game, but I'm going to look for props that are likely to occur regardless of who wins the game, things that should naturally occur as a part of the flow of a game, depending upon maybe the makeup of the teams, not necessarily who's going to win or not. The other thing I do is we look a lot at averages. Okay, as far as determining what we want to do with a prop. I prefer, especially as we get deeper and deeper into the season, I don't like to look at averages. I like to look at the mean. I'll use an example in football. Okay,
it's a better number. It's actually a better number.
Exactly, because I'm going to use in football. Let's say a running back runs for 200 yards in the first game of the season, and then he runs for 50 yards in each of the next 9 games. So he's had 50 times 9 is 450 plus 200. So he's run for 650 yards in 10 games. That's an average of 65 yards per game. Okay. And let's say his total is for this coming game over 57 and a half yards. Wow, 57 and a half yards, and he runs for an average of 65 per game. I got to look over. What I prefer to do is, and I mentioned mean, but it's basically the same thing. How many times has he gone over or stayed under the number that is posted today? Well, let's say in that running back situation, 67 and a half is the total. Well, he went over it once when he had that 200-yard game, but he stayed under it in the other 10 games. So instead of looking over, I'm going to take a look strongly at an under in that situation. Now, that's an extreme example, but it does point out some of the difficulties, especially in the early in the game.
Absolutely a perfect example. You just throw out the highs and the lows and just look at the middle, and you got an absolute under bet right there. Yeah. Unless, of course, they're going up against a team that can't stop the run.
Right.
And then that's the other side of it. So
and that'll be priced in the number somewhat, and the number may look a little bit too high. And if it does look too high, look into exactly what you said. The mean is, for those who may not be familiar with it, it's a fairly common concept, but doesn't come into play very often because you think of averages. Not the mean, the median. The median is what I'm looking for. The number that is halfway between in other words, in my 11-game example before, or 10-game example, the median would be 50. Because there were 5 games Well, it's let's use 11. It would let's say there are 11 games being played, and you rank the numbers down from the highest to the lowest. There are 11 games in there. The median would be the game in the middle, the number 6 game with 5
Right.
above and 5 below, and that basically says that okay, this guy has it. How many times has he exceeded today's number?
Well, when you look at the overall game, we're looking at the number of times a team has won and how many points it was or how many times they've lost. So when you go down to the mean, when you're looking for the mean on this particular matchup, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are the numbers that come up the most.
Yep.
That would be the mean of what this line should be. Why? So a lot of people are betting the underdog at 9.5, 10, which I took 10. And
Yeah.
that's another one of your free plays if you wanted to use that. So why? Because I think even though traditionally the favorite in these games, game ones, have a very good record again, winning and covering the spread, I think the number's out of line. So I'm taking 3 points, the best of it. Now I might lose by 30, but if I'm looking for value, I'm taking 3 points, the best of it, taking Indiana plus 10, because I don't think the line should be any more than 7. Now, why do I say that? Let's say that home court value for OKC is 3 or 4. And because they've been so exceptional, let's say it's 4. Making the line 10 means OKC is 6 point better on a neutral floor. I don't know if that's true. I think that's a little excessive. I think maybe it should be 4, a 4 point better on a neutral floor. So there I'm taking, okay, if it's 4 for home court and 4 for better team, 8. Now I'm taking 10. I got 2 points, the best of it. Yep. It's not like a lot, but it's a positive EV in my mind. Now, over a period of time, I know that's a winning formula for me. But not everybody's going to agree with that because there's a lot of pros out there. Mostly the public likes to lay points and bet overs. That's the norm for them because they don't like rooting for the other side. They like going for the better team. So they're laying the 9.5.
Yeah.
And because a lot of that out there, and they're going over the 230 and they're going over the 231s, and I see even 232s out there. So that's what the public is doing. The sharps are mostly on the underdog, and they're looking like I am on trying to take the 10s. So then there's not a lot of 10s out there. So you got to do some shopping, and you might even have to buy the half point. That's possible.
That's what I'm prepared to do, because when we talked about it yesterday, I said I was holding out because I saw 9.5s out there, didn't see any 10s. I was waiting to see if it occurs. If it doesn't, I will buy the half point to 10. I'm with you on that. Often, now if this were a more competitive series, and let's say the game was let's say price at 3.5 or 4, I'd more likely be on a favorite in that situation, because I think when you're talking about the playoffs, especially the first game of an NBA Finals, I would say the home court advantage in that first game might be boosted by 1 point to 1.5 points, simply because of the atmosphere, the importance of the game, the involvement of the crowd, etc. So I could make a little bit of an adjustment for that for the opening game of a series. But this is I'm not going to say non-competitive game, but you're basically saying that Oklahoma City is going to basically win each quarter by 2.5 points.
Well, I actually think in the end, when you look at their records from January 1 on, these are the 2 best teams in basketball.
Yeah.
And that is a fact. And we have a very young, inexperienced coach with OKC, but he's done a fantastic job. And they've done a fantastic job building this roster. It's an amazing roster. However, when they played against Denver, and this is me just talking, and I could be full of shit. I've been told that before. I thought Denver, with a deeper bench, were the better team. Why? They had a lot of problems with the makeup of that team. I'm talking OKC had a lot of problems with the makeup of the Denver team initially in those games. However, they wore them down at the end. And when you're starting to bring Russell Westbrook off as your 6th guy, who brings a tremendous amount of energy, but he's not always really good. at shooting the ball, and they let him open, and he just lots of times he doesn't even hit the rim. So, but then he'll get games where he'll hit 3 or 4 long shots and make you look foolish. But they don't have a deep bench, and even Joker at the end of the season, do you think you can win a championship with this team? He's not with this roster. No, you need more depth. But that's where OKC kills you with depth. Well, guess what? Another team in the league that has great depth happens to be Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you also have a coach that played basketball very well and won a championship or got to the finals. I don't remember if he won or got to the finals. But as a coach in 2011 with Dallas, he won the championship. So this is a very experienced coach that knows how to do the X's and O's and make plans and makes adjustments. And he has the roster to do so. They're not as good as OKC. They do the same things and play the same way, but OKC does it a little bit better in almost every category. I don't think it's a mismatch. I think it should be good. I think OKC should win it 4-2 in the series.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's 4-0. I don't believe it's 4-0. I think there's too much talent on Indiana to see that happening.
Yeah, no, and I think we talked about it yesterday a little bit where I said, you asked me what I thought was going to happen. I said OKC in 5. And then you talked about it, you mentioned 6, and I said I'll answer it this way. I think it's more likely for OKC to win in 6 than it is for them to win in 4. I respect this Indiana Pacers team and what they've done. So as far as prop betting goes, I'm not sure that I'm going to get too involved initially in this one. I will often use, because you've got the possibility for props throughout the series, I like to take a look at game 1 just to see how these teams are coming out. There's not the great familiarity that you have with the Western Conference teams or your conference teams that you play 3 or 4 times during the season versus the 2 times that the home and the away game that you face a team from the other conference. So looking at how the approach might be, how do they come out in the first, very important to keep an eye on how these teams come out after they make their halftime adjustments, depending upon what the situation is, how they make their adjustments. So I have no problem playing the underdog Pacers for the game in game 1 because I think it's going to be competitive. But as far as the individual props, I want to see what sort of matchups the opposing coaches have been able to uncover before the first game starts, and at least have some ideas. They're not changing anything from what they did in the regular season against whoever the opponents that they played were, or maybe they have made some changes and we have to factor it into our handicapping going forward. So I will sit out the props for the most part in the first game and use what I see on the court to help me evaluate what the let's call it the series game plan may be for each of the coaches.
Let's talk a little live betting. Let's go out and say Indiana comes out and goes up 15-8 right away. You're going to see live betting. You're going to see OKC line drop from the 9.5 or 9 down to maybe 6, maybe.
If it's first quarter, probably 15-8. Yeah, I don't know if it'll drop somewhat, but yes, yeah. I look that now. That sort of stuff I do look for because again, props are independent of what I think is going to happen in the game. If we see Indiana getting out to a quick lead, then all of a sudden becomes a little bit more attractive to play Oklahoma City because let's say you've played the first half of the first quarter, so you've played 1/8 of the game. And now instead of laying the huge number that you were laying for 48 minutes, you're now laying a price for, what would it be, 42 minutes, I guess, out of that.
And going along with that, OKC has a tendency at times to really blow people out by a lot. 30 points, 20 points, 50 points. I mean, it can get ugly. I don't see that happening on the road with Indiana. If they get up 8 or 10 points and you start to see a low price on OKC, I personally will go in and bet OKC at a value bet.
Yes.
If it reverses, though, and this is an exception, this is how you look at the game, because of the propensity for OKC to get out and just absolutely annihilate you
and wear you down late in the
so
game.
it's not going to be easy to wear down Indiana because they have a lot of players, but a lot of good players. But I would not be comfortable if OKC got up 20 to go in there and start betting Indiana because of OKC's tendency to really not take their foot off the pedal.
Yeah.
Some coaches do that. OKC is not one of them. So I would try to come back on OKC with a lesser value price than on Indiana with a bigger dog price when they're getting blown out already. That's because of the tendencies of the two teams.
Yeah. Now my thought there with Indiana would be, this is a team that plays with great confidence, and to them being down by 20 points, as we saw against the Knicks, for example, early in that series, they just shake it off and they come back. Most teams don't have the capability of doing it. Indiana does, and they've done it, and the fact that they have done it suggests that they might. That's not saying I would go with Indiana, but I would like to see how they respond in that situation, because I'm inclined to think with you that, is an Oklahoma City 15-point lead more likely to become 25, or is it more likely to become 5? I'd say it's more likely to become 25.
When Indiana played Cleveland, I don't know what the hell was going on with Cleveland. It was a very strange situation. I was very annoyed with the three players sitting out that one game and not suiting up, because they all came back in the next game, and I felt if they could come back in the next game, they should have been on the floor a little bit in the previous game. So I really was annoyed with that, and the prima donnas that the league is full of really made me mad personally, because I go back to the days where you couldn't take a player off the floor. They had too much pride and character to do that. Not anymore. But anyway, be that as it may, Cleveland was ranked very high as one of the best teams in basketball, along with OKC. Cleveland depended on the three-point shot a lot, as did the Celtics.
Right.
The teams that depend on the three-point shot the most are no longer in existence in these playoffs. The ones, the kind of middle of the road or the lower end of it, lasted longer, i.e. the Knicks. The Knicks are not the same quality as
Boston or Cleveland
or the Cavaliers. They were the 3 seed. Now Indiana is not playing a 3 seed. They're playing a 1 seed, the number 1 seed. So there's a difference in class here going from the Knicks to the Thunder. That's another way to look at this and say, why is the line so high? Well, that's why the line is so high.
No, exactly. That's what they're telling you, is that Oklahoma City was every bit as good as their 68-14 regular season record showed. And again, you go back to the Denver series. I remember we were talking about it, and I said, I expect OKC to win, but I would not be surprised if Denver gives them a battle, because they are an experienced team. They do have perhaps one of the top 2 or 3 players in the world in Jokic, and they've got decent supporting talent, and they have the experience of having just won a title a few years ago. So I was not surprised that was I surprised that it went to 7 games? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But again, remember that if they were going to win it in 6, they'd have to win it in Denver. And, you can't ignore the altitude impact on that, regardless of even if you're used to playing up there a few times a year. So I was not surprised by Denver giving OKC a long series. I'd be a little bit more surprised if Indiana did, but I think Indiana, how do you rate Indiana and Denver? Match those 2 teams up.
Well, they're different. Denver plays an old style of basketball that does not depend on a 3-point shot, that depends on a Superman that plays. He's a center that plays point guard. He brings the ball up the floor. He's huge. Physical dimensions are huge. He's a big man. He can do so many different things. He finds the open man. He sets up other players. He's so smart in how he plays basketball.
And he does give you that inside presence that balances off the teams that rely on the 3-pointer don't have.
If Denver was deeper, if they had the bench, let's say, of Indiana, and had 3, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th player on their roster, they would be a better team than OKC, in my opinion. They lost that series because when they got worn out.
Yeah.
And they had days the scheduling was not in their favor. They had a couple games that were way too close together and didn't get the rest. And they were just a short bench team that played old style football or basketball, excuse me, that had everything going for them except their bench. And be that as it may, they didn't even have their head coach who had gotten fired. Now, I don't know why he got fired. That's immaterial to this conversation, but that's what I felt. I felt Denver was better in a lot of ways. The top five, I would definitely take their 5-man rotation right off the bat. Yeah. They would lose it at the bench. That's where they lost it. But Indiana doesn't have that problem. They got McConnell coming off the bench. They got all these players coming off the bench that all can perform, and they're tested. They, unlike the bench for the Knicks, they never played. So these guys play, and they.
Oh, by the way, another reason. Go ahead.
They have multiple guys that can bring the ball up the floor. So there's a lot of things talking about, well, they're going to give Halliburton a hard time bringing the ball up the floor, but they got 4 guys that can bring up the ball up the floor, and that's going to be difficult to do. So you have such a balanced attack, and I got to go back to this again. This matters. They have a very, very good coach. And boy, I'll tell you, that makes a lot of difference. You're talking 7, 8, 9 guys down. They even play 11 guys. And this guy knows how to use that rotation. And in an up-tempo game, they're not going to be worn out.
One other thing to keep in mind, which is important because you talked about scheduling and all that, Indiana should be well rested. Well, both teams should be well rested, but yes. The way there's only one situation where there's one day off between games. You have a Thursday, the game 1 is Thursday, then the next 2 days are off, then Sunday, 2 days off Wednesday, 1 day off for game 4 on Friday, then 2 games off before the next game, and 2 days off before a possible game 6, and 2 days off before a possible game 7. So there's going to be a lot of extra rest that you normally don't have, because we often have, and we've seen it throughout the playoffs, that when there's not travel involved, these teams will play. If they're playing 2 games, let's say games 1 and 2, there'll be only 1 day off between games 1 and 2. So both teams, and especially Indiana, because they're going to be going up against the better defensive team in Oklahoma City that puts a lot of pressure on you, they should be well rested between games, so they might be able to actually, if they need to play their starters a little bit longer, be in a very good position to do so and not see much of a drop-off.
What you just pointed out, look at game 4. Game 4 will be in Indiana. And that's the game with the least amount of rest between 3 and 4. The OKC has a little bit more vulnerability, like most teams do, on the road. That would be a great game to look at Indiana seriously. Now we're going to be able to see the first 3 games and maybe we'll change our mind totally. I mean, so we're going to have to adjust our opinion as we go along here. And of course, the injury bug can also step in the mix here too. But that spot where OKC only has 1 day off, as do Indiana, but they're going to be in Indiana.
Home, yeah.
So if you're looking at Indiana needing that game to say try to tie the series up at 2-2,
or avoid a sweep, or perhaps complete a sweep.
Well,
in the unlikely situation they're up 3-0.
Well, what's the price on Indiana sweeping this? I mean, that's got to be.
It's got to be like 10 to 1 or something. Maybe even higher.
It's got to be more than that.
Well, OKC to sweep is like plus 300.
Okay. Wow.
No, it's nothing I ever considered, but the fact that the probability is low, but it's not 0. I mean, the possibility there's always a possibility there, but it's unlikely. And you should get paid better than 10 to 1.
It's definitely not 0, but I wouldn't bet it
In
at 10
fact,
to
you know
1.
what? It has to be better than 10-1 because if you take the money line price on Indiana in the first 4 games and you roll it over, you'll probably get something like, I don't know, probably 25 or 30-1.
I was going to say 10 is really cheap.
Yeah.
You would have to roll it. You'd have to roll a money line 3, and you would get huge numbers. So yeah, we've covered a lot: prop betting, live betting, our opinions on the
Yeah.
games. I took 10. I got topping over those two 3-pointers. And you look at I'm going to throw another monkey in here. A lot of times we look at players and we look at the starters and the stars, but let's look at the bench players, the guys that come off the bench that give serious minutes and production, because these guys have benches that do give you a lot of good production. So when you're looking at props, you might start looking at some of these bench players, because like McConnell, he's a hell. He's not a big guy, but man, he makes a big difference when he gets in the game. And he's usually, he's usually leading with, with the second stringers, and they're playing against some second string, and it makes a big difference. So look at these bench players as possibilities for prop bets.
How about Aaron Nesmith of Indiana, who had a great 3-point shooting efforts during the series against the Knicks. He averages 12 points per game. He shoots 43% from on his 3-point shot. So he might be a guy, especially if the game gets a little bit out of hand and Indiana's forced to play catch up.
Absolutely. This is I've got to look at these games, 9 players against 9 players, because they both go deep. And the guys that are coming off the bench are all good, and they could be starting for a lot of teams.
Yeah.
This is 2 very quality teams, and I repeat this: when you look at the statistics and the records from January 1st on, these are the 2 best teams in basketball.
Yeah, and they deserve to be here. Remember, Oklahoma was considered to be the team to beat, and Denver really gave them a test. Minnesota did not. Denver was much more competitive, obviously, than Minnesota was in that series, and Oklahoma City didn't really struggle early. They swept their first. That was that 50-point blowout, I think, that they had in that first game. What was that, against Memphis? I think it was that. They beat early in the playoff run. They are a very good team. And again, remember, both of these teams lost in the conference finals last year. So they are taking, and they have taken the next step that you take in the progression of getting to be a championship team, and that is you pay your dues, you advance a little further the following year. And both of those, if they were going to advance, they had to make it to the finals, and they both did. This is a very compelling matchup. It's probably not the matchup that the NBA would have liked to have seen, although once it was Oklahoma City, Minnesota, I guess you wanted OKC because you got the league MVP in there, but certainly the league would have loved to have seen the big market Knicks in the championship. But it's a compelling matchup from a basketball standpoint. I think we're going to see a very high level of basketball. I would not be surprised. Again, I said OKC in 5 only because of their defense that could be frustrating. I see OKC, well, I'm hoping that Indiana takes one of the first 2 games. In other words, I hope your projection is better than mine, because I don't normally play, X number of games for series. So I hope we get to see it extended. But I would expect OKC to win the first 2 games. I'd expect them to split on the road in Indiana, and then OKC wrap it up in Game 5. That's my realistic scenario, and certainly the point spreads in these first 2 games are going to be in that 8.5 to 10-point range. So, can Indiana pull the upset? Yes, but they're a long shot to do so, and the money line showed that as well. So I think it's going to be a very good series. I think there's going to be, again, I don't get involved in props as much, but we're talking about money management. Getting involved in live betting is part of that entire process. And of course, the NBA presents, now I don't know that this series will do it because we're talking about a championship series, but a regular NBA game between Minnesota and Portland in the middle of the season presents the opportunity to have both teams at points in the game be plus on the money line if you get the right circumstances. Let's say you have a 6-point favorite and they fall behind by 10 points in the middle of the second quarter, all of a sudden they might be a slight money line dog if we're approaching the half. And then all of a sudden it works the other way. And in fact, one of my favorite plays, and I use it in football a lot, is for the favored team, especially if they're at home, to be trailing at halftime, and the halftime lead being such that the deficit at halftime being being greater than the line is. So let's say they're up. Let's say they're down by 12 points and they're favored by 7. They can cover the second half without coming back to win the game. That's the kind of situation I look for. You don't get it all that often, but you get it maybe once every week, maybe once every 2 weeks or something, where you've got a big favorite at home trailing at halftime, and they're laying less in the second half. That if they cover that second half line by 1 or 2, they still come up short on winning the game. But again, that team is good enough, even when they're down, to come back and win the game on the money line. And sometimes I will make a money line play depending upon the quality of the team and depending upon what the line is at halftime. But those are some of the situations that you can develop as inline plays during these games. And again, in the NBA, how often do we see both teams underdogs at some point during the game? Because a team will get the underdog will get off to the underdog will get off to a big lead, and then the favorite will come back, and you can hedge yourself a little bit and get a plus price on the team that was the underdog to begin with.
Sounds like a positive expectation, and one of the subtitle here is creating positive expectations. Prop betting, live betting, we've covered it. Andy, before we sign off, anything else you want to add?
Well, I would say when considering live betting and when you consider in-game prop betting, never force a wager. Never force a wager just to have action. Try and find that there's a rational, logical, reasonable, data-supported reason for making a play. Now, I know a lot of people will have, let's say, 2 bankrolls: a serious bankroll and a recreational bankroll. Okay, we normally concentrate on the serious bankroll because that's the one where you're playing for the long term. You're probably making the significantly larger wagers from. If you want to have a pizza bankroll or something like that and just have some fun, that's fine, but make sure you distinguish between the two. And again, the one thing that you need to be successful is discipline, which sometimes means passing a game, passing an opportunity if you don't feel right about it. If there's something, well, it's a basic thought that I have when let's say I'm handicapping a football game, and I take a piece of paper, and on column A, I list all the reasons for backing team A. In the other column, I list all the reasons for betting team B. And let's say I spend that 15 minutes or half an hour, whatever it is, and I say, okay, I'm done. And I look at my side and I say, gee, I got 9 reasons for team A and 2 reasons for team B. I pass the game because I'm probably being biased. I'm probably looking for reasons to play team A and trying to come up with reasons to play team B. And, because you could remember the point spread's the great equalizer. In theory, every game's supposed to end up in a point spread push. I mean, that would be the situation if you base the line, but of course other factors go into basing the line. And again, these are not robots who play these games; these are humans, and injuries come in during the game. So you want to be as unbiased and as objective as possible. It may not put you necessarily on more winners, but it certainly will take you off more losers.
Let me ask you a question along those lines. Are you a handicapper that makes your own line before a line comes out?
Yes. So I do. And I don't always do it just based on power ratings. Okay. One thing to keep in mind with power ratings and things.
I don't believe in power ratings, really.
Well, I'll tell you why. Power ratings are good in sports like basketball, where you score points 1, 2, or 3 at a time. In football, you score in 3s and basically 7s. So a 2-point difference in a power rating is not necessarily indicative of a team that's going to win by 2 points, but it's the way the nature of the way the game is played. I do use power ratings in the sense of how much better one team is relative to another team. I sometimes experiment by doing something like a half-point difference in a power rating is worth a field goal. A full point difference in a power rating might be worth 6 points, something along those lines. Not that I'm going to use those guidelines, but basically to get an idea of how different these teams are. I take a look at what is the power rating of my lowest rated team and what is the power rating of my highest rated team, and what is that difference? And maybe that should be the difference if the best team in the league plays the worst team in the league on a neutral field. And you'll find out that the difference is not often as great as we see a lot of blowouts.
There are different ways of handicapping games. Power ratings, okay, this team's a 95, that team's a 98. Obviously, on a neutral field, this is a 3-point favorite. However, they're going to have a power rating at home and away that's going to be different. They're going to have a power rating coming off a bye or not coming off a bye that's different. They're going to have a power rating coming off a road game or a home game that's going to be different.
Or back-to-back such games.
Oh, absolutely. How about international games and that kind of stuff? So when people talk about power ratings, I think you got to get, like, I don't believe you can beat the NBA regular season with power ratings. I think it's situational. I think it's what they do the last game. Where did they travel last night? Did they play a back-to-back? Who's going to be sitting tonight on the load management issue? All that, and then sometimes you look at matchups. This team against that team, they don't usually do well against them, or they do very well against them. There's a lot of ways, which is why when you and I are talking about numbers and and then when you look at how Mark handicaps, totally different.
Yeah.
And when you blend all that together, that's where you get your best answers. Now, you get a little confused sometimes because over here you're going to say you should bet this team, and over here when you look at that, you're going to bet that team. Then you got to have to do some homogenizing, and maybe even a little pasteurizing. So anyway, to come up with an answer, and that's where instinct comes in,
and experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have long said, and you used Mark as an example because he's a situational type handicap. But and I think I used this in one of our previous things, that Cincinnati Bengals are 18-3 in such and such a situation. Doesn't mean the Bengals are 18-3. It means that the public underestimated the Bengals 18 times and overestimated them 3 times. It's what the public does that creates the point spread result. Okay, a lot of it is based upon what the line maker puts up and how the public reacts to that line maker. But what I've always maintained for many, many years is handicapping, betting, etc., is both. It's a combination of art and science. The science is the development of power ratings and the looking at the numbers. The art is the interpretation of the other factors that surround the game, like injuries, like back-to-back, like travel. And when you combine the two, you can often come up with a better winning formula because you've included both. If you just go by analysis alone, that's probably not going to work because you're not including the intangible factors. Remember Jimmy the Greek used to have those intangibles when he would be doing the thing on CBS where he'd offensive line edge, defensive line quarterback, etc. Intangibles. Well, that's basically the art of handicapping, interpreting the things that are not necessarily directly found in the numbers that you look at. And one other point, we talk about home field advantage. Let's say San Francisco has a home field advantage of 5 and Tampa Bay has a home field advantage of 1. Okay, what I normally do with power ratings is I take the half. If San Francisco, let's say my line makes it a neutral field line makes the line San Francisco 6. I add half of their home field advantage because they're if they're on the road, I take away half of their home field advantage because a 6-point home field advantage is a 6-point road disadvantage. And I do the same thing for the other team. So I don't just take, okay, my line's 3, let me add the 6-point home field advantage for the home team. Okay, I take half of that and then negative half of the team for the road disadvantage to sort of equate that a little bit. Because remember, if you're playing on the road, that's a disadvantage from how you're playing at home.
And what is the disadvantage of playing on the road? First of all, well, maybe you want to get away from the family. You have a couple of days away from the wife and the kids. That might be a break for you. So that's a positive. But you got to get on a plane. You got to fly somewhere. You got to check into a hotel. They're all disruptions to your normal day.
Well, not only that, you also don't have the 3 or 4 hours of practice time because of the travel. A preparation time, if you will, that the home team has while they're sitting at home waiting for you to arrive at their airport. And a lot of people don't realize those. How many times, Jim, have you handicapped a game and you look at a game 3, 4, 5 times, and that you didn't see the first 4 times? It happens, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
that's the same thing with preparing for a football team. You analyze your opponent, you analyze what they're likely to do. The more time you spend handicapping, so while your other team is on the plane getting ready, maybe taking a little nap because of their travel, you're sitting at home on your stadium in your war room or whatever, and you're looking at film of your opponent. And say, hey, did you just see that? We didn't look at that formation
Yep.
before.
Yep.
That's part of the home field advantage, or what I call really the road team disadvantage.
Exactly. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Proline TV on YouTube. And Andy, logicalapproach.com,
The logical approach,
jimfeist.com.
yes.
So if you go to YouTube, look up Proline TV, subscribe, like, hit the bell, make sure you get notices that when we put something new up. Send in comments, send in criticism, likes, dislikes. We like to answer
Questions.
them. We questions, suggestions, all that stuff. But I hope you enjoyed this. Andy, we're into almost an hour, which is
Yeah.
about normal for us. And have a good week.
Well, that's the good thing. This is unscripted, and we wanted to. It was originally going to be just money management, but sometimes when we talk about how we looked at, for example, we spent a lot of time looking at the Oklahoma City Indiana game. A lot of that involves concepts that are related to money management as well, as far as how you interpret things and the things that you look for. Because money management is also about what do I bet on and how do I bet it. Well, if we're analyzing part of the game and saying this looks like something that we want to take advantage of, that's part of money management. If we ignore something or we take something, gee, I'm uncomfortable about this aspect, that's all part of money management, because it's all a question of do I or do I not dip into my bankroll for such and such game, such and such situation.
Absolutely. Have a good weekend, Andy. We'll
You
talk to
too,
you
Jim.
next week. You take care. Everybody out there, good luck and stay healthy and eat right, sleep right, get a little exercise, have fun with the family. Take care, everybody.